So the first talk is by Marek Pycia from Zurich. Marek, I'm not 100% sure I pronounce your surname correctly. I think you told me once, but I might have forgotten. So is it correct?
Yes,
and yeah, anyways, the floor is yours. The screen is yours. Please begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. And yes, the pronunciation was perfect.
Marek, we can't hear you. The second.
I believe I unmuted myself.
No, we can hear Marek.
I can hear you.
Oh, thank you. So thank you for organizing this annual meeting of matching in practice. The plan, I believe, is to have the next one in Zurich. Hopefully in person will be possible. So this is a paper with Peter Trojan from University of Virginia. It's a paper on simplicity in games and mechanism design. It introduces some concepts and provides a preliminary study, but there is a lot that could be done. Also, this is, of course, 25 minutes, so this is an advertisement more than a full talk, even though I will have lots of stuff on the slides. I will go quickly, but please feel free to interrupt me. Right, so I will try to manage time. I mean, if you don't follow something, it's probably you are not the only one, so please feel free. So we look at what is simplicity, and we propose a definition, but the reason we are interested in simplicity is that in market design, it is an important property for many reasons. So already Vickrey, in his 1961 Journal of Finance paper, made the point that we want mechanisms to be simple because they economize on participation costs when they are simple. You don't need to strategize. Patak and Sonmes, in the matching context, documented that simplicity levels the playing field. You don't discriminate between more and less sophisticated players. There is lots of evidence from McKinsey and other consultancies. I haven't seen an academic paper on that, that simplicity brings participants to markets and other institutions. That's in line with economizing on participation and leveling the playing field. And finally, simplicity allows, gives more confidence to the designer that the designer knows what the market participants actually do, right? If market participants are confused, which may or may not be good for revenue or other reasons, if they are confused, we don't really know what they do. So those are reasons to study it. And of course, there is a large literature on simplicity. The gold standard in simplicity studies are dominant strategies and also ex post equilibria to some extent. Those standards are has been recently shown to be possibly too weak. Right? Already in 1987, Kagel, Harstadt, and Levin showed that the agents don't necessarily know how to play second price auctions or dominant strategy mechanisms. They try to manipulate. And there has been a lot of evidence confirming that in recent years in both auction and matching contexts. And so that led several people to try to define stronger simplicity standards. Like most, the main paper here was Shengwu Li's. And so what we do is we follow on this line of thinking. We will define an entire family of simplicity standards, or what we call simple dominance standards. We will focus on an interpretation in terms of various degrees of limited foresight, but one could equally well use our theory to think about computational limitations. So that's the main thing in the paper. And then once we have it, this conceptual idea, then we can ask all sorts of questions. what mechanisms are sufficient, right? We will work with extensive form games for those we do not have revelation principle. So how close to the revelation principle can we get? We will give two answers to that question. We will look at the question whether requiring more simplicity limits the flexibility of mechanism or market designer. And we will explore 3 examples in our family. So Shenggu Li obvious dominance is one of those, and we have some new result on Shenggu's concept. And we propose within our family to others one-step dominance in which participants see only one current decision node or current information set and the next one and understand those, but might be confused about later nodes. And strong obvious dominance in which participants understand their current choice, but might be confused about the subsequent choices. So in particular, while Shenggu concept works with standard agents who can do an arbitrary length of backward induction, we are allowing agents who cannot do arbitrary length of backward induction. Right, so there is a secondary conceptual contribution. We show how to think about agents who, at least in market design context, who are not standard game theoretic agents with complete strategic plans. Right, we show how to think about agents with partial strategic plans. Right, in savage words, agents who will decide or plan how to cross a bridge once they arrive at the bridge, not beforehand. So this is an overview of the paper. We have some interesting side results or byproducts of that approach. So we get a simplicity-based foundation for personalized posted prices. We give a simplicity-based foundation for ascending auction mechanism. And we give a simplicity plus efficiency and fairness based foundation or characterization for random priority, right? A popular mechanism in matching context. That's the overview. There is a huge literature, right? The literature typically tries to assess the trade-off, and in simple environments, typically you don't lose by insisting on simplicity. In more complex, you can lose. Huge literature. Our trade-off results are in line with those findings. And there is a tiny literature on limited foresight, right? So what we do for limited foresight, there is almost no precedence. The model is very simple. We have a finite set of agents and a finite set of outcomes. We could work with a compact set of outcomes and impose some under some topological assumptions, no problem. But to keep things simple, we work with finite for most of the talk. There is a preference domain. Each agent has a preference domain. For now, I don't impose any restrictions on this preference domain. Later, I will impose a restriction we call richness, which still will allow social choice with and without transfers. So standard matching problems will still be fine. Allocation of goods with and without transfers. School choice auctions, it all will be covered even after I add that restriction. But for now, we are fully general. We study mechanisms when we unpack the black box, right? So we look at an extensive form game. To keep things simple, we restrict attention to finite games, perfect recall. We allow imperfect information, though one of our results shows that from design perspective, that doesn't matter much, but we do allow it. And we introduce 2 normalizations. No agent moves twice in a row, and at every information set at which an agent moves, there are at least 2 moves to choose from. Right? We could easily adapt the results to dropping those normalizations. Right? So that's an extensive form game, standard definition. Now, a mechanism, usually in matching literature, we think about mechanisms as a mapping from types to outcomes. Right? Because we unpacked, we give more structure. we will obtain this mapping from types, or rank types are effectively in our setting those strict preference ordering, or weak. We actually are agnostic. We can allow weak orderings. So from preference orderings to outcomes, and because we unpacked, we think about a mechanism as a pair, such an extensive form game, and a profile of strategies for agents. The strategies might be conditional on types, of course. Right. So those are the underlying standard assumptions. Now, the key innovation that allows us to think about agents who don't understand the entirety of the game is what we call a set of simple information sets, or foreseeable information sets. Now, so this is this concept. This is the main concept to understand. Well, one of two main concepts. The second is coming on next slide. So that's a moment to pay attention, and the rest will be application of that. Now, to define this concept, this is just a standard idea that if I have two information sets, then one follows the other if there are histories which are subsets of each other. So this is just standard. The interesting concept is the set of simple information sets for an agent at a particular information set at which this agent moves. Right? A collection of such sets is exogenously given. We treat it as a primitive. Right? It's a very simple concept, but we will use it a lot. And this is the most novel, in some way, part of the paper. Now, we assume in the paper and in the talk, though we have companion work where we relax those assumptions, we assume that the current information, this is typo, this should be I star, that the current information set is simple, so it's in this collection, and we assume that only information sets at which agent I moves are simple for this agent. Both could be relaxed. We have companion work relaxing both. So to give some examples, if we allow all continuation information sets at which an agent moves to be simple, then we will get Shengu's concept. That will come out on the next slide. But we can also have many other we can use many other families of simple information sets. We can say that only current move and the next time an agent moves, only those two information sets are simple. That will lead to our concept of one-step simple dominance. We can allow only the current information set to be simple. This will lead to what we call strong obvious strategy proofness. We can allow things in between. For instance, we can allow agents who are able to think k-step into the future. Right? In fact, those are all special cases, k0, 1, and k infinity. And we can allow, in this general construction, we can allow all sorts of other things. As I said, we can plug in definitions from computational complexity theory and see what happens. We haven't done that. It's something we plan to look at. We haven't done it at that point. We focused on foresight. Okay, so this is a primitive which we use. Now, how do we use it? We use it to define those partial strategic plans for agents. Right? So for an agent I, at a particular information set I star, we will define a strategic plan or partial strategic plan to be a map. Oh, this is an agent, and the agent also has a type. Right? So that maps information sets that the agent perceives as simple from I star perspective to actions at those information sets. Right? Those of course might depend on types or preferences of the agents. Now, along the game path, agents might refine their strategic plans, but there is That doesn't mean agents are inconsistent. So let me give you an example. Let's think about an ascending auction, asynchronic ascending auction, clock auction, price goes up. And at certain moments, I'm asked as a bidder whether I want to continue bidding or drop out. If I drop out, that's it. I take my outside option. If I continue bidding, I know the current price, so I might either be sold the object at that price, or I might be asked again after a price increase whether I want to drop out. Right? In such an ascending format, even if I'm only able to see one step ahead, it is a no-brainer to continue bidding if my current value, if the current price is below my value. The reason is that I can always drop out tomorrow, right? I don't fully understand the future, but I understand at least that tomorrow I will be able to drop out, right? So I will never do worse than by continuing than by dropping out today. I will just have more options, right? So that's that example, by the way, shows that bidders in ascending auctions, for them it's enough to be one step simple, to just look one step ahead, right? They don't need to have a full understanding of an auction. Okay, so this is this partial strategic plan. So that's another basic concept that we introduced. So those are new concepts. Now, the third concept that we introduce is the simple dominance. So a partial strategic plan is simple dominant if basically what I described for an ascending auction happens. Simply dominant at a particular information set for an agent if for a particular type of this agent, if this type prefers the worst thing, so prefers anything possible if the plan is followed. Right? One can think about the worst thing possible when the plan is followed today and at all simple nodes. Right? So I know that I can do certain things in the future, and I price that into my strategy. Right? So the worst that can happen by following the plan at simple nodes and is still weakly better to anything possible, including the best thing that could happen if at current node I deviate and do something else. Right? So this is the situation of the agent in the ascending auction. Right? By continuing today when the price is still low, the worst that can happen is that I drop out tomorrow. That's what I can, in this partial plan, tentatively plan for as my insurance strategy. And the best thing that can happen by not continuing in the auction is dropping out today, which is not better. Now we need to define what is a possible outcome. Let me skip that definition for lack of time. Now there is an induced strategy because at each information set, agents actually do something, right? They have this collection of thoughts they travel with through the game, but then they do something, so we can deduce what strategy will be followed. We can talk about, and then entire strategic collection is simple if all strategic plans are simple along the path of the game for the induced strategy. Right? So if you never end up in certain nook of the game, we don't worry about it. Okay, so this is the main part of the talk, and I have 7 minutes. Examples, I already mentioned examples. If agents have unlimited foresight, that gives us Shangri-La's concept. He defined it slightly differently, but it's easy to show our approach or formalization is equivalent. If you look only one step ahead, we get what we call one-step simplicity or one-step dominance. If you only understand today current information set, we got strong obvious strategy proofness, another concept we introduced. We get this intermediate ideas of case step and so on. Okay, so this is the concept which could be used and developed further. Now, to give you some idea that it's a tractable operational concept, let me show you some results. So number one, we can address this trade-off issue, right? So can you implement more things when you have agents who look farther ahead? Well, in a weak sense, yes, because if I have a game which agents play by looking k-step ahead, then I can extend the strategy. Agents who can look farther ahead, I can construct strategic collections for them. It's nothing, this is just accounting. Now, more interestingly, there exists a game, and K prime, so K prime is strictly larger than K. K prime simple strategic collection that cannot be equivalently implemented for agents who have shorter foresight, right? For any K prime and K. So there is a real trade-off. Now, for this real trade-off, so weak monotonicity trend forward, the fact that if you don't look ahead at all versus even one step, that there is a difference, this is intuitive. If you don't look ahead, we will not be able to do price discovery with you. But even one step of looking ahead allows us to run auctions. So we can basically do, in simple settings, we can do as well as with Bayesian mechanisms. In general, between 1 and 2 or 1 and Shengu concept, examples or games which which you cannot implement if the foresight is too short are getting complex, right? So this is the simplest we have. I won't go into details. They require sufficient complexity in the environment, right? And it's easy to see this game if I spell it out, that it's not that it's 2-step simple but not 1-step simple, but it's much more tricky to show that I cannot simplify this game, right? So that takes several pages of proof. So that's one result. Now, those examples rely on sufficient complexity in environment. In fact, we show that if environments are simple, then you are fine. There is no difference in simple environments between 1-step foresight and Shengu concept of obvious strategy proofness with basically infinite foresight. Okay, one can re-express simplicity as weak dominance on a class of games. Let me skip that. Here's an interesting one. When we are designing mechanisms, we define everything for imperfect information, but actually perfect information games are sufficient. It's not difficult to see. We are comparing worst case scenario and want it to be above best case scenario. If I reveal information, both those sets shrink and the inequality is maintained. This was observed for obvious strategy proofness by Ashlagi and Goncharovsky. We extended to the general class. Okay, the proof is easy. Let me skip. Okay, so those rich preference domains, I don't really have time to go into details. Well, actually, why not? So formally, we define it. There is a underlying structural relation on outcomes, which is transitive and reflexive. You can think it's same outcome, but I have more money. So this is unambiguously better. Right? And the preference profile is consistent whenever, if there is between two global outcomes, this relationship, then an agent I actually prefers X outcome to Y outcome. And the domain is rich if all strict preferences consistent with this exogenously given and arbitrary dominance relations are in the domain. Right, so this lots of stuff is in there. It's school choice without transfers. You just care about your own social choice without transfers. Trivial dominance relationship. To have dominance, there need to be identity between global outcomes. Right, that's Gibbard-Satterthwaite, special case of allostatic. Allocation without transfers. Well, without peer effects, you only care about your own outcome, right? So dominance relation is, it's actually equivalence relation then, when your outcome is the same. Right?
Marek,
Yes?
Marek, only 1 minute left, and I saw there was a question from Alexei. So if you want to take the question, or if you want to summarize it in 1 minute.
Oh, okay, thank you. Oh, I thought I had 5. Okay, very good.
Marek, if you want, you feel free to finish.
No, let me take, well, let me, okay, so that all sorts of examples are there. The reason to go, let me quickly summarize. The reason to go beyond Chenggu is because the standard problem. I mean, if you think ahead a lot, then all sorts of things we don't understand are supposed to be obvious, like chess, for instance, is supposed to have obvious strategies. We have those we have characterization for Chenggu class. We know how all those mechanisms look like. We have characterizations for those other classes, right? We have this result that in some simple environments, there is no loss of generality from moving from infinite to one-step foresight. We have a general structural properties of one-step foresight, strong obvious strategy proofness. And we have an application to random priority. Namely, we show that random priority is the sole mechanism which is obviously strategy proof, Pareto efficient, and symmetric. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. Alexei, your question.
Well, probably you already partially answered your question. My question, I was thinking exactly about when the question was when equivalence of infinite and finite for finite k. But I think you mentioned, and probably more detailed answer will require more time, right?
Well, no, I mean, so this environment that Chenggu studied, it was a so-called binary allocation environment, right? In which an agent, there is a transfer, but there are 2 substantive outcomes for each agent. You win an object or not. In those environments, there is no difference, right? There are some others, but the things quite quickly become more complex. But with binary outcomes, no problem.